Our gospel reading for this day comes from the 15th chapter of Luke. Jesus responds to his critics and tells several parables, of which we will only hear the last. Listen now for what God would say to us in these words. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me." And this simply was not done in that culture. So the father divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all that he had and traveled to a distant country. And there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it. And let us eat and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field. And when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has got him back safe and sound.' Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him, but he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a goat, so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found.'" The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. The parable of the prodigal is a favorite of many. There's certainly something warm and comforting about it. God's love is kind and tender-hearted, embracing us despite our many failures. Who wouldn't like such a parable? Well, the older brother, for one. Perhaps some of the people to whom Jesus originally told the parable, and maybe even us, if we're not so quick to identify with the younger brother. Now, many of us are quick to notice and to claim for ourselves the generous grace that is found in this parable, But for some reason, we're not so quick to see the offense, the scandal that accompanies that grace. The older brother tries to point it out to us. He stands outside the party, refusing to go in, refusing even to acknowledge that this person who has burned through the family inheritance on prostitutes and partying, that he is even his brother. But we shake our heads at the older brother and hope that maybe he'll somehow come around. But what if we press the imagery of the parable just a bit so that perhaps we might feel a little more like the older brother feels? What if the younger brother, if he's Bernie Madoff and we've lost our retirement in his scams, then do we want the father to welcome him with open arms? What if the younger brother has committed terrible crimes? What if he's murdered someone? Should the father still welcome him? And what if we press the image to the limits of the imagination? What if the younger brother is Adolf Hitler and as Berlin burns around him, he comes to himself like the younger brother and says, "What have I done? What have I done? Father, I have sinned against humanity and against you." Should God welcome him? Recently, my wife and I took a getaway to Florida to escape winter. And when I go on vacation, very often I will pack a bunch of books that I think I ought to read. And more often than not, all of them will remain unopened. So on this trip, I tried something a little more modest. I took one book that I have been meaning to read. Some of you may have read it. It's called The Shack. If you're not familiar with it, the main character in the book is a fellow about my age named Mackenzie. And Mac, as his friends called him, has received a rather curious invitation to spend a weekend at the shack where a still at-large kidnapper murdered his youngest daughter a couple of years earlier. At first, Mac assumes this is some sort of cruel hoax. But gradually, he comes to believe that the note in his mailbox is from God. And so Mac heads out to the shack for his weekend with God. And I don't want to spoil it for you if you've not read it, so I'll try not to reveal too much. And by the way, I do recommend the book highly. But I do want to share one of Mac's experiences that particularly moved me. During this strange weekend at the shack, Mac has an encounter with a mysterious, beautiful woman who's dressed in a long flowing robe like that a judge would wear. And as they begin to talk, the conversation turns to Mac's hurt and anger over the murder of his daughter, and to his questions about how a good God could ever have allowed such a thing to happen. And as they talk and as Mac's anger grows, the woman reveals why it is she is there with him, and it is for judgment. And for a moment, Mac thinks that he has died, but assured that he is quite alive, he begins to wonder, well, what it is he's going to be judged for. What is it he needs to repent of? But then the woman explains, no, he will be the one who is doing the judging.